In this video, we're going to be covering how to build a blog post page template. Now, when you go to a website, you will find that there's often a blog post area or insights section, which will have, insights into the company or software that's being used, or maybe conversations around a topic. I'm sure you all know what a blog is. But when you go to a blog post, you'll find that they are quite consistent across the website. So when you go to, say, blog post 1 on a website and then blog post 2, they will share very similar page structures. So this is where a page template will come into play. And in this video, we're going to be building a blog post template. To get started with our post template, I first broke down the original design into slices of the page, which would make it easier to approach. So we've got a header organism at the top, and then we've got this article, which I've labeled as an atom, but on second thoughts would be better suited as a molecule, as it will be a container which will contain several smaller components, specifically atoms, as it will be links, headings, paragraphs, images, nothing too big, just smaller parts which make up a larger component. We then have a banner CTA organism and a related organism before finishing off with a footer. Now, to speed up the development process and to skip over, going through how to build each component itself, I've imported the banner and related organism, as well as the intro molecule. So I'll show you those in our system. So we have our header and footer as we've already developed, but I've also imported this related organism, which makes use of an intro molecule, which isn't documented at the moment. And this is just a series of images and related posts. And then we have our banner, which is our call to action. Now, again, these aren't pixel perfect to the original designs because I haven't imported the necessary fonts, but it should give you an idea as to how we can structure these in the context of a post template. So to get started, I'm going to first close all my files and commit the imports that I've just made. I've also imported a particle which allows us to process HTML strings, and that makes use of a package called HTML React Parser. So lesson 11, post template. So the first thing we're going to want to do is open up our components and create a new directory called templates. And within templates, we'll create a new folder called post. And we'll go ahead and copy over one of our smaller components. So we'll take the navigation items and bring it into our post, and then just rework these as I've done before. Cool, so we've got our post React component, which is importing React, and the styled post, which is a styled component. And then we will export this as post template by default. And our post template is defined by a styled component, which has no specific styles at the moment. And we'll try and keep this as empty as possible because we want to rely on the foundations that we've created with these styles in our organisms, atoms, and molecules. So we've got our style.main, and we're importing that to our post component. And then within our story, we are importing the post template as an example post and using the title templates to group it with the name blog post to import into our Storybook environment. Now, we aren't using any knobs at the moment, but we will be setting those up in a moment using our knobs.json file. But this is just an old setup from the navigation knobs, but we'll be using our own context information within here. So when we head over to our Storybook environment, we have our blog post, which is currently returning nothing as we have no HTML content within our React component. And we can go ahead and start importing some of our previously made organisms. So the first one would be our header. So we can go ahead and open up our post, and every post will have a header component. So we can import header from header. And we can throw that at the top of our styled component. So now we have our header with no navigation items, which we'll set up in a moment, but we'll just go ahead and import the other components we need. So now we have our post template starting to come together. Even though we have no content involved, you can see we're starting to get these structures appearing within the page. And we've imported our footer, our banner, our header, and our related organisms, even though you can't see the related organism. And now we can go ahead and start importing some data to these components. So if we head over to our header organism and have a look at the JSON that we were using previously, we can go ahead and copy all of this and bring it into our posts. So we're going to replace these keys with header, and then we'll paste in our previous configuration. So what we want to do is we want to bring out this navigation to be in our default, and we want to bring this under there, and we'll give this the label header content, and we'll set the group to global. So navigation is an object. So default, okay. Okay, so what we've done here is we've set up a header key, and the header will have a default value of an object with navigation, which is an array, and we have group, which is global, and then header content. So what we can do with this is in our post stories, we can import header from our knob data, and we can pass that in as a prop to post template. And then in post template, we can destructure this, get header. And then if we spread header, I believe this should work or not. So we might need to give it a refresh. So if we inspect our header component, so we're spreading header props and header default navigation. So header default navigation. So we want to spread header default? Oh no, in our stories we're... Okay, so we're not using it as a knob at the moment. So we want to do is pass it in as an object, and then do header dot label, header dot default, and then header dot group. And we can go ahead and bring that up to our add-on knobs. So now we have access to our header, and you can see this is the header content that we are providing. So if we wanted to update this to say view shop, then it updates immediately. And even though it's quite a large JSON file, it kind of gives you control now over the post template global information. If you wanted to, you could just, have this as a JSON file which isn't controllable with knobs. That might be preferred for global components such as the header and footer, but in this example, we're just going to use knobs for now. So we're populating header, and we can go ahead and do the same sort of setup for our footer. So we can go ahead and close that and add a new key underneath called footer. And we'll head over to footer, grab our setup, paste it in. So what we want to do is change default be there. We want label to be at the bottom, and we want group to be at the bottom. And then what we want to do is we want to set this up to be menus. And I believe that should work. So we'll set that to footer content, and we'll set that to global as well. So now we have footer, and the default value is menus. So when we spread this over our component, it'll pass it into our footer component and render the navigation items. So we can go back into post stories and import this. And then we can copy this import of the prop and replace references to header with footer. And then in our post template, we now have access to footer, and we can spread this across the bottom. And now we have our navigation items in the footer. So I'm going to repeat this process now for the other organisms, the related and banner, but that's just how you'd import default data. So I've gone ahead and imported the data for all of the organisms. So as you can see, I haven't really structured or written any new HTML or CSS for these components. I've simply imported them and provided them a JSON file, which will influence them because it passes in data via props and then renders out the items for our page. So the concept of importing the data and spreading them across the components is quite an advanced one. So if it doesn't make sense to you, don't worry. This is just so I can get up and running. And if you want to learn a bit more about how to import JSON information the way I have and spreading it, you can download the code repository for this project and have a play around with it yourself, or look into the spread operator for JavaScript. Now, we're going to focus on this video in how we can structure the post template. So far we've got 4 out of the 5 consistent elements within the page. We've got our header, we've got our footer, we've got our related items, and we've got our call to action banner. But now we actually need the blog post information. So although we've got a structure which is going to be repeated throughout every single blog post, the data that is going to be dynamic for the blog post will be the related items and the call to action, as well as the actual context of the blog post itself. So to get the context, or rather the content of the blog post, we're going to create a emulated example in our post stories. So we can go ahead in our post. Now to add content to our blog post, we're going to use a new prop for our post template called content. And we are going to go ahead and create a new molecule now called post content. And we'll pass in content as a prop. And we will need to import it, post content, from molecules post content. And now we can go ahead and create this new molecule. So in molecules, we'll create post and then a file called post content. And this is going to be a JavaScript file which will make use of our parse HTML particle. So I haven't really gone over what the parse HTML particle is. It's basically going to handle rendering HTML in our application. So if we passed it a string of HTML, it'll take that string and it'll convert it into actual HTML elements within the page. So if we wrote something like hello world as a string, it will take this string and convert it to this in the DOM. So it'll create an actual paragraph element. So what we can do is in post content, we can import React. And create our post content object, which will take in content, and then it will return parse HTML content. And so VS Code has automatically picked up that we have this component available to us and it has imported it for me. And then we will export default post content. And what we could actually do is wrap this in an article, just so we have a bit more control over the structure of the contents of this post content. And we can give it a class name, post content. So we've got this component being imported to post. We're passing it the content prop. And in our story, we can now go ahead and pass in a new content prop. And for now, we'll just hard code the example I demonstrated just now with hello world as a paragraph. And if we head back to our post template, you can see we are getting hello world returned. And if I go to Bob Ross we can go ahead and copy this happy text, which is just some Bob Ross quotes, and we can go ahead and go back into our Storybook environment. And if we wanted to, we could create const blog content equals, and then we'll paste in this large string. And I'll need to go ahead and make sure this is all just a one-line string. So we've got blog content. There seems to be an issue. Okay, so because it's not all on one line. Cool. So if we bring blog content in as our prop now, then you can see we are rendering the paragraphs. We want these to be a bit more tight. So what we could do is we could go into our post content and create some styles specifically for this, or we could even do it within our post in the styled post. I'm going to go ahead and style it in the context of the molecule. So we'll do post content.styles.jsx. And I'll go ahead and copy this simple setup. And we will do so. And then what we can do is we can do paragraph max width, and we'll set it to, let's say, 700 pixels, and set margin left auto, margin right auto. So I just gave Storybook a quick refresh and it seems to be styling it correctly now. So we can add some padding to the top and bottom of this blog post. So 64 pixels. And now we're starting to get something which is very similar to our original design. So if we go ahead and compare, you can see we've got our header at the top. Again, the fonts aren't necessarily correct. And we have this paragraph which is being styled in the middle. And then we have our consistent elements. So this is a template which is dynamic because the structure is always going to be consistent, but we can replace the content of the blog post. So the HTML string we provide to change the contents of the article. We can have a custom call to action on each blog post, or we can have a global default value, which would be great to sort of help the user experience for the content editors. And then we have our related items, which we could set on each blog post within our CMS, and then our global footer information.